Welcome back to the Courage for Life Study Bible, Study of Esther. And today we're going to be studying chapter 3 in the book of Esther. This is our third lesson in the book of Esther. Last time we talked about the two profiles, the one on Esther and the one on Mordecai. But today we're going to be going back into our lesson and we're going to be looking at chapter 3. Now, our first lesson that we studied was Your Decisions Matter, and that was where we looked at Queen Vashti and her decision to not appear before the king at his banquet. Caused her to be banished as queen, and the king began looking for another queen. Then we see in lesson 2, God works in mysterious ways was the title of our second lesson. That is where Esther was chosen to be part of the harem of the young girls who might be chosen to be queen. So as we move into chapter 3, what we see going on here is that Haman begins to plot against the Jews because he gets mad at Mordecai. But before we go into this lesson, let's do like we always do, and let's stop and pray, and let's look at our prayer at the beginning of this lesson. Abba, Father, you are the one true God. Help me to live faithfully for you despite persecution. You know, that's big words to say. It can be very difficult to live for God in the face of persecution. For those of us who live here in the United States, we may face some disgruntled comments from unbelievers. But in most cases, we're not necessarily persecuted for our faith, but there are many places around the world of believers who are persecuted. So as we study this lesson, let's think about that persecution. Let's take those people into our hearts and minds and into our prayers as we study the book of Esther. So in chapter 3, what we're looking at here is we observe this text, and this lesson covers chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. The title is, as I said, Faithfulness in Persecution. And what we're seeing here is that King Xerxes had promoted one of the men in his kingdom by the name of Haman, and he really put him over all people. And so the king allowed everyone to bow down to Haman because he was such a high official. But Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused to bow down. He, for whatever reason, chose not to bow down. And as we go into the interpret section in 3:1, it tells us that Haman was from the people of Agagite, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he was likely a descendant of ancient enemies of the Jews. So possibly Mordecai knew that he was from descendants that were enemies of the Jews. And also the Jews only bowed down to one person, and that was God. They wouldn't bow down to kings and pagan leaders and so forth. So Mordecai, for whatever reason, he chose not to bow down. That angered Haman. Now Haman wants retaliation, and he's decided, because he's full of rage, he's got lots of pride, lots of arrogance, he wants to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom. So under the interpret section, I want to read you the very last sentence. It says, despite the risk of persecution, we are called to live faithfully for Jesus and rejoice in the privilege of suffering for him. Now I want to read you 1 Peter 4:12 through 14, because that's a corresponding or parallel passage that talks about persecution. And I think we need to meditate on this as well. So in 1 Peter 4:12 through 19, it says, dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through, as if something strange were happening to you. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it is revealed to all the world. If you are insulted because you bear the name of Christ, you will be blessed, for the glorious Spirit of God rests upon you. If you suffer, however, it must not be for murder, stealing, making trouble, or prying into other people's affairs, But it is no shame to suffer for being a Christian. Praise God for the privilege of being called by his name. For the time has come for judgment, and it must begin with God's household. And if judgment begins with us, what terrible fate awaits those who have never obeyed God's good news? And also, if the righteous are barely saved, what will happen to the godless sinners? So if you're suffering in a manner that pleases God, keep doing what is right and trust your lives to God who created you, for he will never fail you. Now, as we look to the application section in our study today, I want us to look at two things. First of all, accept the things you cannot change. We can't change the actions and behaviors of others. So what we need to do today is journal how we will choose to live faithfully to the Lord no matter what others say or do. And then we want to commit to change as well. As we read 1 Peter 4:12 through 19, let's journal our commitment to live boldly for Jesus, despite the risk of persecution. Are there any other courage steps that you need to take today? For example, do you need to embrace God's grace and forgiveness of others who maybe someone has hurt you or wronged you? Do what is right, but also give grace to those who've done what is wrong. Forgiveness is an important piece to the puzzle. And so let's embrace our God-given opportunity to be courageous in our faith and to stand up for what is right and to live boldly as Christians. But let's also be caring and kind to others who don't have that relationship with him. Who knows? Maybe your faith and your walk with the Lord will be an inspiration to someone else today. Be sure and join us next time as we continue to study the book of Esther and we go on to lesson 4. God bless you and have a great day.